New Left. The New Left emerged in the United States during the late 1950s and 1960s as a generational and ideological break from the Old Left, which had focused mainly on class struggle and labor union politics. The New Left expanded the meaning of left wing activism to include issues of civil rights, anti imperialism, feminism, environmentalism, and personal liberation. Inspired by movements such as the Civil Rights Movement, anti Vietnam War protests, and second wave feminism, the New Left sought to challenge not just economic inequality, but also cultural conformity and institutional oppression. While not formally tied to the Democratic Party, the New Left profoundly influenced its direction, especially during the McGovern and post Vietnam eras. The Students for a Democratic Society, the free speech movement, and groups aligned with countercultural ideals embodied this spirit. The New Left rejected both Cold War liberalism and Soviet style communism, advocating instead for participatory democracy, grassroots organization, and moral authenticity in politics. Its legacy endures in today's progressive and activist wings of the Democratic Party, influencing causes like climate justice, anti-racism, LGBTQ+ rights, and critiques of corporate power. The New Left transformed American liberalism from a purely economic reform movement into a comprehensive moral and cultural project for social change. Neoliberals. The neoliberal Democrats rose to prominence in the late 20th century as the pro-market and globalist wing of the Democratic Party, reshaping its economic and foreign policy identity after the conservative wave of the 1980s. Rooted in the ideology of the Democratic Leadership Council and embodied by figures like Bill Clinton, Al Gore, and later Barack Obama, neoliberalism sought to reconcile traditional democratic social values with modern capitalism and international engagement. Neoliberal Democrats emphasize free trade, globalization, and international cooperation as essential to prosperity and stability. They champion policies that integrate the U.S. into global markets, supporting agreements such as NAFTA, the World Trade Organization, and later the Trans-Pacific Partnership, arguing that open trade fosters innovation and global growth. Economically, they advocate fiscal discipline, deregulation, and market-based solutions to public issues, believing that a dynamic private sector drives national progress more effectively than heavy-handed state intervention. In foreign policy, neoliberal Democrats tend toward liberal interventionism, the idea that the U.S. should promote democracy, human rights, and international order, even through military or diplomatic involvement when necessary. This worldview shaped policies in the Balkans, the Middle East, and beyond during the 1990s and 2000s. Though often criticized for favoring corporate globalization and U.S. intervention abroad, neoliberal Democrats redefined the party's modern identity as internationalist, market-friendly, and globally engaged, bridging liberal ideals with pragmatic global leadership. Blue Dog Democrats. The Blue Dog Democrats form the centrist to conservative faction within the Democratic Party, originally founded in 1995 by a group of moderate House members after the Republican takeover of Congress in 1994. Many of them hailed from the South and rural America, regions where the party's liberal stances on social issues had become politically costly. The name Blue Dog references the idea that these Democrats had been choked blue by their party's shift to the left, while also nodding to the traditional yellow dog Democrat loyalty of the South. Ideologically, Blue Dogs emphasize fiscal conservatism, bipartisan cooperation, and a pro-labor but business-friendly approach. While they generally support unions and worker protections, their labor emphasis focuses on economic stability, job creation, and small business growth rather than large-scale labor activism. They often advocate infrastructure investment, rural economic development, and trade policies that protect domestic industries. Prominent Blue Dogs have included Representative Colin Peterson, Representative Jim Cooper, Representative Stephanie Murphy, and historically figures like Sam Nunn and John Breaux. They were instrumental in shaping centrist legislation, such as welfare reform under Bill Clinton and certain cost containment measures in the Affordable Care Act. Although their numbers have declined since 2010, Blue Dogs continue to represent the pragmatic, fiscally moderate, and pro-worker yet pro-market strain within the Democratic coalition. Progressive. The Progressive Democrats represent the left-wing, reform-oriented faction of the Democratic Party, advocating for sweeping social, economic, and environmental change. Their roots trace back to the early 20th century progressive era, when Democrats like Woodrow Wilson and William Jennings Bryan promoted anti-monopoly and pro-labor reforms. But the modern movement was revitalized in the 2000s through figures such as Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Progressives emphasize economic justice, labor empowerment, and social equality. They call for stronger unions, higher minimum wages, expanded workers' rights, and universal health care, arguing that corporate influence and income inequality have eroded the middle class. Many align with the Congressional Progressive Caucus, one of the largest ideological caucuses in Congress, which supports legislation like the Green New Deal, Medicare for All, and increased taxation on the wealthy to fund public programs. Their emphasis on labor stems from the belief that economic power must be redistributed to working people through collective bargaining, fair trade, and an expanded social safety net. Progressive Democrats often view the labor movement as a moral and political backbone of democracy, essential for reducing class disparities and corporate dominance. Although sometimes clashing with centrist Democrats, progressives have reshaped the party's agenda on climate change, healthcare, and workers' rights, pushing the Democratic mainstream closer to a social democratic vision of economic equality and inclusive growth. Racial Justice Democrats. The racial justice faction within the Democratic Party centers on confronting systemic racism and advancing civil rights, equity, and inclusion across American institutions. Emerging from the long lineage of Black, Latino, Asian American, and Indigenous activism, this wing draws heavily on the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, and later, organizations like the Congressional Black Caucus, Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus. Racial Justice Democrats advocate for criminal justice reform, voting rights protection, immigration reform, equitable housing, environmental justice, and representation in government. They view racial inequality as an enduring structural problem that must be addressed through targeted public policy, such as police accountability, reparative justice initiatives, and investment in historically marginalized communities. Labor issues hold special importance within this faction. Racial justice leaders argue that racial and economic inequality are deeply intertwined. They support unionization drives in industries employing large numbers of minority workers, higher wages for low-income workers, and fair labor standards that uplift communities of color. Prominent figures aligned with this movement include John Lewis, Cory Booker, Ayanna Pressley, as well as grassroots coalitions like the Movement for Black Lives. Together, racial justice Democrats have redefined the party's moral and policy focus, pushing it toward a vision of multiracial democracy grounded in equity, dignity, and shared prosperity. Greens. The Green Democrats represent the environmentalist and eco-social faction within and adjacent to the Democratic Party. While not formally a unified caucus, their ideology aligns with the global green movement's focus on ecological sustainability, social justice, and grassroots democracy. Emerging from the environmental activism of the 1960s and 1970s, sparked by events like the publication of Silent Spring and the First Earth Day, this faction has grown into a major moral and political force in American progressive politics. Green Democrats advocate for aggressive action against climate change, pollution, and corporate environmental destruction. They support transitioning to renewable energy, ending fossil fuel subsidies, and adopting the principles of a Green New Deal, which links climate policy to job creation and economic equality. On foreign policy, many Green-aligned Democrats embrace environmental internationalism, emphasizing cooperation through global climate accords such as the Paris Agreement. Prominent advocates include Al Gore, Ed Markey, and organizations like the Sunrise Movement. Within the Democratic coalition, Green Democrats embody the vision of a post-carbon, equitable, and ecologically balanced future, urging the party to treat climate justice as the defining issue of the 21st century.